Good morning. Thanks for coming to our session and to the CSP for inviting us to talk. So I'm Suzanne Arnold. I am another previous chair of Agile, and that's how I ended up involved in this project, which we're going to talk to you about this morning. So I'm here just to really give a welcome and to tell you that we're going to talk to you about the benchmarking exercise program for older people, or BPOP, as you will hear it now called for the rest of the morning. Miles is going to give a background to that and the rationale and the methods. Sarah's going to talk through some of the results from the wave one of the project. And then Chris is going to tell us a bit more about prescribing resistance exercise for sarcopenia. So I'm going to hand straight over to Miles.
Thanks very much. I think if anybody has their mobile phone with them, please get it out and get the camera ready, because we're going to show you a QR code in a few slides' time, because we want your input into an online survey. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about BPOP and where it came from and what we are doing. You've already heard about sarcopenia, and I just want to sort of recapitulate some of this. Sarcopenia and frailty as well, which are closely linked, as you've heard, is important, and it's common, and it causes a lot of bad outcomes. So we know that it's associated with an increased risk of death, but probably more importantly, it's associated with an increased risk of hospitalization, a longer stay in hospital if you become ill for any reason, as well as falls, loss of independence, and need for ongoing care and impairment in activities of daily living. So it's bad for older people, it's bad for healthcare systems, and it's bad for social care systems, so we need to do something about it. And we know that resistance exercise training works. And specific exercise training around resistance is really where the best evidence is. Walking alone, not good enough. Aerobic training, not good enough, good in their own ways. And balance training, great for balance, not good enough for sarcopenia. But unfortunately, we know from previous surveys that we've done within the British Geriatric Society nationally that many people with sarcopenia are not offered resistance exercise training. And when they are offered a resistance exercise training, or exercise training in general, it's not specific and it doesn't deliver what's really needed for an optimal outcome if you have sarcopenia. And that's really the rationale for BPOP, which is a national benchmarking and feedback program. And at the start of this process, we sat down and we said, well, how do we make practice better? Now, I'm Professor of Trials for Older People at Newcastle University, so, of course, my first instinct is, oh, we should do a trial. But as soon as you start to sit down and think about it, you say, well, do you really want to do that? Do you want to do a trial that lasts 10 years? Do you want to then try and get the evidence into practice? Practice is likely to have moved on. Why not just short-circuit that and say, we know what we should do, let's study what we're really doing, and let's work with practitioners in a way that enables them to take on board evidence and to benchmark and to improve their practice through continuous quality improvement. And that's really the rationale behind the BPOP program. So this is the feedback model, where you collect information, you feed it back both at an overall level, but also at an individual level. You benchmark so that you can see how you're doing compared to your peers. You learn from that, and you learn from each other in a learning community, and then you do continuous rounds of data collection and quality improvement that way. And this model, of course, is what we've been doing in hip fracture for years, and it's been incredibly powerful in driving change and really transformed the quality of care in hip fracture over the last 20 years or so. So in wave one of BPOP, we took on 10 UK centres, good geographical distribution, as you can see here. And they were all NHS physiotherapy services looking after patients who had sarcopenia or frailty. We're very clear that BPOP is a service improvement program. It is not a research program. So that's important when it comes to taking part and engaging with your audit departments. So we require Caldecott approval, but not research ethics. And what we did was ask every centre to contribute anonymous patient data on 20 consecutive patients that had been through their physiotherapy service. We then collected that, we analysed it, we provided an overall report and recommendations, and this tailored individualised benchmarking feedback to each site. But importantly, that was embedded within a community of practice, and we brought together different centres to reflect on their practice and the findings and tell us what they'd been doing in response. And Janet and others were very much part of that. A series of webinars that some of you may have been to, where we talked about the evidence behind sarcopenia and recommendations for good practice in training to meet the training needs that Suzanne had identified through a qualitative sub-study of BPOP as well. So I'm going to stop there because that's the least interesting part of this presentation, and the results are much more interesting. But we want to hear something about your experiences of managing sarcopenia. So if you scan this QR code, there are some questions, and we'll go through those a little bit later. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now to tell you about the results from Wave 1.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah DeBiase. I work currently in West Yorkshire in the Integrated Care Board in the Long-Term Conditions Programme, Improving Population Health. I'm also a previous chair of Agile. I'm proud to be here as a member of the BPOP team. I always get to follow somebody who uses big words, like recapitulate. And so I'm so sorry that you're stuck with me. I've also got a cough, so I've got a glass of water. So if I do cough, please excuse me, I apologise. So, as I've said, I'm going to take you through the results of Wave 1, and then we'll talk a little bit about the recommendations that have panned out from evaluating the data that we got back from those 10 participating sites. So we had 188 data sets submitted from the 10 sites, so just short of the 200 that we might have expected. You can see quite a bias towards females in the collection, which we not necessarily unexpected in an older population. Majority of them living in their own home, 92%, so we need to think about whether or not our engagement sites and the demographic coming through those services are spanning the whole range of older people who are at risk of sarcopenia and or frailty in our next wave, so that we can think about, for example, those that might be living in care homes. I'm really sorry, I can't see what's on the slide with either my long, so I'm going to have to turn. Forgive me, Janet, who's told me today that she hates people that turn around to look at the slides on the screen. So the reason for referral, and note that you can choose multiple ones, so you'll see that's why the percentages don't add up. We're more often than not for falls prevention or to improve physical performance, and much less so for a specific reason around improving sarcopenia and or frailty. Frailty score, Janet's touched on the clinical frailty scale, an average of 4.8, but we did have a range of 1 to 7. So again, thinking about our future waves, are we engaging the sites that are actually working with the people who are also probably more progressed on that frailty spectrum and have still got the benefit and still got the potential to benefit from strength training and resistance exercise training. However, we are glad that we are seeing people at that 4.8 level, because it means we are acting proactively before those individuals start losing any functional mobility and or quality of life. Interestingly, only 17% who were referred into the service had a pre-existing diagnosis of sarcopenia on their referral form. You can see at the top, the majority of the referrals were coming through from general practitioners, and then a little bit more towards outpatient clinics, be that hospital outpatient clinics or older people outpatient clinics. And then you can see a much smaller number of self-referral, which again, are we reaching the community that we're trying to improve outcomes for by enabling them to self-refer into our services? And so the additional learning that doesn't come through in our recommendations, but worth pointing out in the data. Baseline assessment methods, so thinking about your own reflection as you enter in the Mentimeter questions. This is the findings from the 10 sites in terms of the assessment methods that they use for individuals coming through. You can see that majority of people tended to use either the time get up and go or a different assessment altogether. The 5 times sit to stand test that we've heard Janet talking about, so the chair stand test has been prevalent there, so about just more than 30% of the sites were using that. Grip strength is in there, but probably not as high as we'd want to see in the context of trying to address frailty and or sarcopenia. And you can see no assessment at all manifested in some of the data sets that came back to us. Assessment after the intervention period. So you would anticipate, surely, that you would have assessments done at the same extent post-delivery as well as pre-delivery, so that you could demonstrate that you had an impact and also understand whether or not there was an ongoing need for ongoing intervention. And you can see majoritively where assessment was done at the beginning, it wasn't necessarily always completed at the end of the intervention. And that happened across the board. So what do we know? 61% of our patients were assessed using an objective strength-based measure of physical performance, but many were assessed on non-strength-based. So that included the Berg Balance Score and the Tinetti, which would have come up in those other, in the other column in the bar chart before. And the methods of reassessment following completion of an exercise program varied, with 30% not receiving a reassessment at the end of their intervention. Let's move on to prescription. So majority of the exercise resistance was delivered through body weight. So very few services across the 10 sites used resistance bands, ankle weights or free weights, and then there were some examples of others. So the majority of the modalities used to offer resistance was body weight. Of those who prescribed bodyweight exercises, 44%, it was the only element that was prescribed. 26% were prescribed exercise bands, and 21% were prescribed using ankle weights. Have a think about that in your own practice in terms of whether or not you think that changing of intensity of exercise through just using body weight is sufficient for addressing sarcopenia and or frailty. As you can see, resistance as well as body weight, they increase the number of repetitions, so that's changing the volume of the exercises that were completed rather than the intensity. There was increased number of sets and increased duration, so doing more, not necessarily increasing the load. And then you can see that the band weight and the increased weight were much lower in terms of the progression through the participating sites. So increased number of repetitions, 86%, increased number of sets, 37%, increased duration 36%, and only 26% were progressed in intensity, such as increasing the number of weights or increasing the resistance in the band that was used. And very few used the 1 rep max methodology. And we do understand that the caveat to that, working in community services, and we're happy to take questions on that because it's come up in previous conferences as well, I'm sure Janet and Suzanne will relate to. So, what happened after the exercise intervention? 41% of individuals were signposted or referred on to further exercise program following completion of their program. And I will stress in the room that specifically from an older person's physiotherapy perspective, that signposting versus referral are two very different things. And we have to ask ourselves, is signposting someone to carry on and engage in exercise programs in the community is the right thing for a population who we are trying to prevent adverse outcomes for? So key messages to take away. Sarcopenia is not being routinely diagnosed, and that's be that by the referrer or by the receiving therapists or the services that the individuals are coming into. Opportunities to do that diagnosis are not being taken at the time of the pre-intervention assessment, and we're being missed because we're not using those objective strength-based methods of assessment. For example, the grip strength that Janet has talked to in her slides before. Resistance exercise is not being monitored and it's not being progressed. If you don't monitor it, you can't progress it. If you don't monitor it, you can't motivate the individuals with feedback, just like the feedback from this service that the BPOP study is given to the practitioners. Motivating the individual in terms of their progress and their improvements is vital in terms of behavioural change and motivating to carry on and participate in their exercise programme. And the evaluation of the outcome of the exercise programme wasn't reassessed at the end of it. So how do we know what we're doing is right? How do we know that we need to progress? Taking that all back in terms of the results that came through, these are the recommendations that we translated back to the participating sites and have used in those ongoing education sessions that we've delivered back to the participating sites who have done this all volitionally and voluntarily of their own accord in order to continuously improve the services that they provide, but also through the wider Agile membership and others who've got an interest in working with older people. So assessment is so important. All patients who are referred for a probable sarcopenia and or frailty diagnosis should have an objective strength-based assessment undertaken before you prescribe an exercise program. Otherwise, how do you know that you need to build that strength element into the program or not? diagnosis. Opportunities should be taken to give a diagnosis of probable sarcopenia, and you can do that with a grip strength test or the chair sit to stand test. You do not need to have the MRIs in order for that to happen. We want to see probable diagnosis being written down in your discharge letters, and you send them back to the GPs and or other referrers, other services that you're referring on to. It is in your gift to do that if you're using objective strength-based assessments for sarcopenia. Exercise prescription, I think I don't need to spell it out. The fact is, if we are going to deliver exercise to build strength, we need to progress that exercise throughout the course of the delivery of the programme. We cannot just rely on the intensity changing. We need to, the volume changing in terms of numbers of repetitions. We need to increase the intensity. We need to add load throughout the duration of the exercise programme. And if you're not reassessing to know that someone's improving, then how are you going to know when to increase that load and when to add in additional intensity? And taking forwards, education so that people understand why it's important to continue to participate in strength-based exercises throughout their life course and on the back of attending an exercise programme specifically for strength loss. And I said earlier on around the difference between signposting and referral, you know, do be mindful of where you have achieved that behavioural change. That signposting might well be satisfactory and people can build that into their lifestyles. But some people might need longer, and in the constraints of the rehab services that we have in the NHS, you need to reach out and understand what the provision is across your voluntary and community sector organisations so that you can refer individuals into the continuation of exercise programmes that allow them to sustain the gains that they've made and to continue to go on and benefit. What's next for us? So we are doing future cycles. We're currently in wave 2. And I think Wakas, that's my current boss, Miles, will be able to tell us about the details of that whenever we get to the Q&A session. But this is about us enabling more and more sites to come on board and actually put themselves forward to learn about what they're doing well and what they're not doing so well and what they can improve aligned with the evidence-based practice, and get support from their peers to work collaboratively together to generate improvements and also to learn how to overcome challenges. We're happy to take expressions of interest for Wave 3, and I think talking to the audience and to Ben's point, we'd be really keen to see more of our community rehab units participating, because I think if we could see some of the activity and what's happening for those who might be further up that clinical frailty scale spectrum, that'd be really insightful. We do have some community rehab units in Wave 2, less so than we didn't have so many in Wave 1. So we'll start to see some of that coming through, but I think it'd be nice to get more and more of those sites coming through, Ben. We're also applying for research funding, if we can find the one that will listen, for our Impress project. So our Impress project is based on all of the learning that we've generated and the feedback from the sites. How do we turn that into something that's sustainable and meaningful and has got much greater reach? So we want to define, develop and refine through testing cycles an e-learning education programme for people who work with older individuals who are at risk of sarcopenia and or frailty, so that we can embed this in practice across the board, because we can't keep adding on to the curriculum in undergraduate and or postgraduate in that regard, or we'd never be out of university, would we? We're talking about that in the mild traumatic brain injury earlier on this morning. These are the sites that took part, in case that resonates with any of you and you work in those areas and weren't aware that you'd taken part. Do reach out if you wanted to find a contact name of the individual, the lead therapist that was our link person, and our collaborators there from the University of Newcastle and other BPOP team members. So let's find out what your experience of managing sarcopenia is in the room. I hope you've all been able to access the Menti. So what are your experiences of managing sarcopenia? So we have 52 responses, thank you very much. Limited, minimal, none, very limited. So I think we've got a theme coming across there. Almost every patient somebody's got there. Regularly assessed for sarcopenia, great. Deliver resistant training, load-bearing tasks, that's exciting, thank you. Private practice, advice, goal setting, outcome measures. Rehabilitation, great. Not enough focus. Focus is on frailty as an umbrella term. That's a very good point. But I think there's an opportunity, if you think about if we're getting people in referred from a perspective of frailty, you've got the opportunity to unpick whether or not there's an underlying sarcopenia presentation there too. and help educate back to the referrer, for example, if actually it's not a frailty manifestation, but actually sarcopenia, and then therefore your assessment and your reassessment and your progression to demonstrate the change can highlight that. Next question. Current role. Pardon me. I'm not sure if people moved on screen or whether or not people just didn't want us to know what you do in your day job. Well, oh, here we go. They're coming through now. Are these only coming up to you now as I go through them? Oh, are they? Okay, okay. Well, I'll give it a minute then to come through. Quite varied. Yeah. Okay. So I don't think that there is any individual on that list who's working in a role where they would not encounter someone who was at risk of sarcopenia and could benefit from strength-based assessments, objective strength-based assessments, and exercise prescription. Okay. Next question. So when you answer this, think about your usual caseload, day to day. There we go. I think we've corroborated the fact that you don't have to be working in an older people's service to encounter people who are at risk of sarcopenia and of frailty. Thank you. Next one. So if you're encountering them, are you assessing their strength objectively? Be honest. It's anonymous. Thank you for your honesty. Okay. And I suppose when we have some of the Q&A, it'd be interesting to understand the sometimes. Why is it sometimes? And why is it not always? Or if it's only at assessment, why not at follow-up, for example? And thank you to those who are always doing it. Don't stop. Next one. How do you do it? If you never do it, we've given you some clues in the previous slides, so you can cheat. Good old Oxford scale. I think if we were to take one step into moving into a more digital world as physiotherapists, purchasing a grip dynamometer, like the one that Janet displayed on her screen, and moving away from the Oxford scale might be your win today. So if you get onto your service manager and ask for it, they're not very expensive. You don't need to write a SOP about how they're used. The University Hospital of Southampton has got one that's widely available on the World Wide Web. I think we've got an action that you can all take away with you today. Oh, got a handheld dynamometer there, super. The short physical performance battery, absolutely. Janet came up on her slides around when we actually knew that someone had sarcopenia and frailty, that is a really meaningful measure of understanding improvements in physical performance. Grip strength occasionally, not often enough. Thank you for your honesty. I don't know if I've got another question, do I? Still got some coming up. Oh, I do. Treatments. I'll give you a minute to reply because it might not be a one-word answer. Now, strength training. That was an umbrella term. Is it strength training that it changes both volume and intensity? Are you increasing the reps and the load? And that's just me challenging you to self-reflect in that when you respond from a strength training umbrella term. Loaded sit to stand, great. You can get really great weighted vests that are really nice for the loaded sit to stand. I'm quite using those in practice. You can add and take the weights out to personalize it to the individual. Okay. So active exercises, like Miles alluded to, if they're aerobic but not resistance-based, they won't have an impact on sarcopenia, and they won't build strength. We might have impacted on the TheraBand business model today, but we might have improved the grip dynamometer's business model today on the back of our presentation. So yeah, just, don't over-rely on your resistance bands. I think there's a message in today's slide that that intensity element can be introduced in much more dynamic ways. And, if you're like me, you can never find the TheraBands when you need them. Or you've only ever got red in the cupboard, and it's not good for anybody. A motored bike, great. And I'm hoping that means resistance can be increased and decreased. Weighted cuffs, yeah. Okay. I think they're all the questions now, yeah? Yeah, okay. So thank you very much for participating. It's been really meaningful. We'll talk to you at the end around how to get in touch if you're interested in Wave 3. And I'm going to hand over to Chris now, who is, again, much more eloquent than I am, and who's someone I really enjoy listening to. So.
Thank you for that no-pressure introduction of being much more eloquent. Thank you for that. Hello, everybody. So I'm Chris Hurst. I'm a research associate at Newcastle, part of the NIHR Biomedical Research Centre. So for my declaration before I even start, really, I'm an exercise physiologist by background. I'm not a physiotherapist. So luckily for me, I sit in my luxurious university office on the top floor of the building, think about things, read papers, don't have to worry about seeing patients, don't have to worry about implementing any of this. So keep that in mind for the next 10 minutes or so, really. If you don't really want to listen for the next 10 minutes, I know it's close to lunch and things like that, most of what I'm going to talk about will be referenced on my last slide. So there's QR codes and there's free downloads to a couple of fairly helpful resources, we think. Or catch me at the end. I'm more than happy to email or whatever those resources on. Before I start, I just want to mention nutrition and get it out of the way, and I'll forget about it if I don't do it now. So I'm not going to talk about nutrition in any depth because I'm interested in exercise, and nutrition is well beyond my capabilities, really. So Janet very helpfully queued us up for this earlier. So we have lots of discussion and debate about protein and so on and so forth. But in terms of my main interest, we need to make sure people have enough of an energy intake if we're going to get them to exercise. Let's not worry about the specific nuances of protein intake or this, that, and the other, sorry. But have they got enough energy to be able to engage in the exercise that we want them to? And I'm not talking about nutrition anymore. Don't ask me any questions about nutrition either. So we have fairly good evidence now that resistance exercise works for people. This is the diagram on this slide is from a 2015 meta-analysis, and there's quite a few of these now. And essentially the information in the red box is just showing that if you do some resistance exercise, it improves people's strength. So the really good news is that, again, there's more and more evidence coming out with people diagnosed with sarcopenia, people with frailty can still benefit. And actually, it doesn't matter how old you are, we've got evidence to suggest that those in the 90s, comfortably into the 90s, can improve their physical function and their muscle strength. So age is certainly not a reason to expect no improvement or a reason not to initiate this kind of exercise for people. Getting them to do it is a totally different story, but the fact that we can say to people, look, just because you're old, and we see this in some of our research that we've done and discussions with older people, they view themselves as being too old to do this type of exercise. So there's a broader issue around how we communicate about strength-based exercise. We'll not get into that too much, but there's no reason why they can't benefit from this. There's very, very few people that won't benefit from strength exercise. Very, very few. And actually, the good thing is, if you look at the forest plot or the diagram, so you'll see that the effects from resistance exercise for older people aren't always huge. So they're not going to get very, very strong. But the good news is for people that are very weak at baseline, they only need to get a little bit stronger for it to be meaningful for them. We don't need them lifting big, heavy weights. They just need to be a little bit stronger, and it has a meaningful impact on their life. And then the final thing to say is that the little diagram in the bottom corner is just a screen grab from a Cochrane review in 2009. So this isn't new, any of this. Older people can do strength exercise and get stronger. We've known that for a while, but how good are we getting that message through? How well are we getting that message through? What more do we need to do? Sorry. Just some exercise physiology 101 here. Fundamental principles. So it doesn't matter how fancy our equipment is, how good our facilities are. If we don't do the very basics right, it's a waste of everybody's time. Okay, so the exercise has got to be specific. So we know, Miles, I think, mentioned balance earlier on. So if we want to improve somebody's balance, we know they have to do balance exercise. We have to challenge the balance. If we get them stronger, it will probably have a little bit of an effect on the balance, but we've got to do things that are specific to what we are trying to achieve, okay? So if we want to get people stronger, they've got to do some strength-based exercise. We've got to challenge their muscles to get stronger. Sorry, I don't think I'm pressing the button hard enough. And we have to make them do more than they're accustomed to. So I'm going to talk about intensity and how we prescribe intensity in a few slides' time, but we've got to make them do more than their body is used to. If it's easy and they're comfortable and they're happy and they're not, you know, it's very, very straightforward to them, they're not going to get any stronger. We've got to overload people. So exercise isn't magic, whatever type you want to do, okay? So we're looking fundamentally to remodel people's physiology or their mechanics to get them stronger. So we prescribe them with an exercise dose, and that provides them with a stimulus, and the stimulus changes things in our body, and that's how we get stronger. If our dose of exercise is inappropriate, then they're not going to get the correct stimulus, they're not going to get any stronger. So we've got to overload them. And Sarah alluded to this in her talk a few times. We've got to progress people over time. So that a person can't do the same exercise for 8 weeks and hope that they're going to get stronger. They can't do the same thing session after session. We've got to progress it, and we've got to make sure we continually overload them. So sometimes you'll see these terms combined as progressive overload. Every session that we do with somebody has to fit into the bigger program of training. And if we don't do any of these, as I said, it doesn't matter how much equipment you've got, how brilliant you are working with people. If you don't do these, your exercise program isn't going to be as effective as it could be. And as I've said, to get the right dose, we can manipulate a number of variables, and these are just a few. There are other things we can do. I'm not really going to talk about concentric, eccentric, isometrics in too much depth, really. We can talk about that afterwards if you want. But these are the fundamental things we can move up and down quite easily to get a manipulation of the exercise stimulus from the dose that we prescribe. So I wouldn't imagine any of these are particularly new to any of you. The training frequency, exercise selection, how hard we get somebody to work, the intensity of exercise, the volume of exercise that we get them to do, and how much rest we allow them to do. So I'm going to talk about a couple of these. I'm not going to talk about all of them just because I haven't got time. What I would flag, particularly about rest periods, sometimes people get a bit hung up on rest periods and think it's really important. I don't think it is, which is one reason I'm not really going to talk about it. So just make sure people have enough rest. We tend to allow the people that we work with to self-select their rest. If they feel like they've had enough rest, fine. If they don't, let them have a little bit more. Isn't going to make much difference in the grand scheme of things, really. Training frequency, I appreciate, is probably going to be largely out of your control, but we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So which exercises are we going to do? This is always a question that people ask me. And the short answer is, I don't know which exercises we should do. I don't know whether there are ones that are better than others. I have ones that I like and that I would always have in my programs, but are exercises better than other exercises? I don't know what the answer to that is. So our focus is obviously, and I hope hopefully most people would agree with this, our focus for older people is going to be on the lower body. So we're really going to be interested in calves, quads, hammies, glutes, fundamentally. But let's not forget that people have an upper body as well that they're going to need to do the things of their daily life that are important. So the good thing about that is we can train our upper body when the lower body is having a rest, and it all fits together nicely. So I think really we have to be aiming for every session we have with an older person to be doing some form of whole body workout. So I'm not a huge fan in this context, I don't think, of split routines, so having an upper body session, sorry, that's twice now, an upper body session and a lower body session. Let's try and get a bit of everything into every exercise session that we do. And just to reiterate the point, are there exercises that are fundamentally bad? Maybe this one, I think, but most exercises aren't fundamentally good or bad. Probably the most important thing is you have to work with the individual to decide which exercises that they like and don't like. It's human nature that there will be exercises that people don't like doing and that they try and avoid. So there nearly always is another option. Why make somebody do something they really don't like to do? We have to get people to engage, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but the psychology of it is very important. So let's not try and get them to do exercises that they absolutely detest, because nobody's going to win there. So there's lots of scope. I just very quickly want to mention chair-based exercise, and I've realised this is a dangerous thing to do. Yeah, sorry. So very quickly, I'm not anti-chair-based exercises, but I think we have to try and get people out of a chair as quickly as possible. And I'm not saying anything more about it. And body weight as well. I think body weight will do a lot of what we want, but at some point, for some people, body weight is not going to be enough. And I think hopefully most people will agree with that. Body weight is not going to be enough all the time for everybody. It will certainly be a good starting point for nearly everybody that's frail. Let's start with body weight. And let's not forget that people have to be able to do the exercises technically, even a squat. So a chair rise is a squat, essentially. They have to be able to do that technically well before we even think about giving them any load or getting them to put a weighted vest on or whatever. If their movement pattern is not very good, we have to work and get the movement pattern better before we try and load them. So I want to talk about exercise intensity as one of my favorite programming variables, because Sarah talked about this. And this is the thing that we struggle most with, I think, and it can be hard. So what the research tells us is that it's a complex picture in terms of what works best. So there are lots of intensities that will get people stronger. You don't have to lift big, heavy weights. You can have lower intensity exercise and do more of it, and that will get you stronger. But at some point, if you want to improve your maximal strength, you have to work hard, and we have to give people more intensity, okay? Things will plateau as well over time, so we've got to load people a little bit more, and we've got to get intensity out of them. So I don't know if I've chopped it off these slides, but from my point of view, intensity is king, really. There's nothing more important than getting intensity into people. It doesn't matter what exercises you choose, we've got to get some intensity at some point. This is from another meta-analysis that hopefully I haven't put the reference on, so apologies for that. But what it shows is if the top diagram compares low-intensity and high-intensity exercise. High-intensity strength-based is more effective for improving maximal strength. But you'll see below, so the other ones are, what have we got? Stair climb, walk and speed, timed up and go. So more functional or even power-based type movements. So we don't need as much load. We probably want people to move a little bit quicker to do power-based exercise, but they're not going to have enough load, as much load, sorry. The most important thing is that relative intensity is pretty high. Okay, so that means people should, Dawn Skelton uses the term that I've basically pinched off her, they should be feeling that the muscles are getting a bit shaky. They should be feeling hot. They should be getting, close to getting a sweat on, if not a sweat on. If they're not, why not? Okay, so obviously the intensity will vary from person to person, but for that individual person, they are going to have to work hard if we want to maximize our improvements. It's exceptionally difficult to get somebody in a room engaged with exercise, and if we don't get them to work hard, we've wasted all that effort to get them there. It's probably not going to look like this, what we get people to do, but in your context, what is it going to look like? They've got to work hard, they've got to get some intensity, they should feel that the muscles shake, they should be getting a sweat on. And you have to manage that in the session, obviously. So at the start of a program, we might only do a very, very small number of exercises because we want people to work hard, and that's all they're capable of doing. They only do 3 exercises in a session. I'm not going to talk about exercise volume just because I don't want to get into that debate, but there is nothing magical about 3 sets of 10, despite what some people think. We can manipulate that. We can do different things. We might do 1 set of exercises and we'll do 3 different exercises. That might be enough. There are no hard and fast rules. And again, this was mentioned previously, how do we monitor and prescribe intensity? So there are lots of different ways we can use. So I'm a big fan of rating of perceived exertion, RPE, so some of you may be familiar with that. I'm more than happy to talk about that or send some helpful resources. So I think that's a really good way of monitoring, prescribing resistance exercise. So we want people to be in the red box, really. They should be telling us that it's hard or very hard, what we're asking them to do. If they're telling us it's easy, something's going wrong somewhere. Either they're not quite telling us the truth or we're not getting them to do the right thing. Some of you may be familiar with reps in reserve, repetitions in reserve, or RIR. So essentially we might want to give people a set of exercises, and if we're getting them to work hard, they might only have 1 or 2 repetitions in reserve. So they could only do 1 or 2 more before they would have to stop. I'm not a huge fan of 1 rep max. Some people might be, I think, and the reason for that is just to defend my position. It's a very skill-based assessment of strength. So people can get better at doing the test, but not actually get any stronger, okay? So there are lots of different ways to prescribe intensity. Some I think are more helpful than others, but RPE is quick and easy. You just need to print it out, stick it on the wall, have it to hand, and that can give you some really useful information to prescribe the intensity and evaluate what the individual is doing. Sorry. I'm nearly done. And here's just, so this was from a paper we published in 2022, Miles referenced it early on. This was our starting point for people with sarcopenia as a prescription for exercise. We're certainly not suggesting that this is perfect and this is what you should do, but we wrote a paper about how to prescribe exercise, so we thought it was only right that we gave some ideas of how to actually implement that. So as I've said, ideally you would do, this is obviously from my ivory tower in the university, you would do 2 sessions a week with somebody. But the good news is if we can only see somebody once a week, we can probably do enough in 1 session that people would get enough benefit, okay? So 1 really good quality session is better than 2 half-interested ones, okay? So only being able to see somebody once a week, which I know isn't always that easy, isn't a barrier to being able to see some good results. Just some examples of exercises that we think are good, and again, not revolutionary. As I've said, there are lots and lots of options. YouTube is a brilliant place to go for exercises, for demonstrations and things like that, so there's loads of resources online. We've got to get people to work hard, as I've already said. Exercise volume, so the more load somebody has, obviously the volume is going to be lower. The volume of sets and reps is going to be affected by the number of exercises you have in your session. So we don't need to try and squeeze in too many exercises. We don't need to do 10 different exercises a session if that doesn't work, especially if they're complex movements and people need time to learn how to do them. And people need a rest, so don't forget, you know, and as I said, don't get hung up on how much rest there is between sessions. They need, between exercises, sorry, they need time to recover before we do the next set. I'll move on to the next exercise. How do we progress? So our data suggests that Sarah presented and other data that Miles has reported in a previous survey. Our data suggests that progression isn't always as effectively delivered as it could be. So how do we do that? Again, this is not rocket science. Get them to do more exercises, get them to do more sets and reps. We've got to probably progress the intensity at some point. That might be going from body weight to, let's think, a body weight squat to a squat with a weighted vest on, or a squat holding something, or a squat with a resistance band round, whatever it might be. But how are we going to get more intensity out of the exercise that you're using? We can do lots of other things as well. More training frequency. Once they're more accustomed to the exercise, you can give them less rest and metabolically overload them a little bit. Get them to move a little bit quicker. So I haven't really talked about power or functional-based exercises. At some point, we need to get some of those within our program. And people, there's a lot of evidence saying that power training and speed of movement is more effective for improving functional performance, and it probably is. But for people that have got sarcopenia or people that are quite frail, we just need to get them stronger first before we worry about getting them to move quickly, okay? So power is speed times strength. So if we can get them a little bit stronger, they're probably going to get a little bit more powerful. At some point, we're going to ask them to move a little bit faster when it's safe to do so, but we don't need to worry about that too much in the early days, I don't think. And as I said, more intensity is going to get them stronger. It's a balancing act, obviously, as I've already touched on. Sets, reps, volume, number of exercises. It's all a balance. And that's me, really. So these are the two resources. Hopefully the QR codes work. If they don't, grab me at the end or grab me outside. I'm more than happy to take email addresses and fire things across. Not all exercise is created equal, as alluded to earlier. Even within the category of resistance exercise and strength-based training, not all of it does the same thing. So we have to think about that. And if we don't give people the right dose, we're not going to remodel their physiology. Everybody's going to go home happy, but nobody's going to improve everything. Our service is not going to look as effective as it can because we don't improve outcomes for people. As somebody that sits in the university, doesn't see patients. Thank you very much.
Okay, does anybody have any questions to start with? Oh, there's a couple over there.
I have got a questions from online, if that's okay.
Yeah.
They have been patiently waiting. This question was posted quite early. So this is a question for Sarah and or Janet. How do you talk to people about sarcopenia and frailty with a positive as opposed to a negative spin? Because many of people don't like to be referred of being frail or sarcopenic.
I mean, I use the terms frailty and sarcopenia in my notes and when discussing with other healthcare professionals. But when I'm dealing with the older person sitting in front of me, I very much say what we're going to do is we're going to make you stronger so that you can get up from the chair, get up from the sofa, get on the bus. So you have to put it as a positive slant. I do use the words, though, getting stronger, because I want them to realise that's what we're doing with the exercises.
I would agree in terms of language matters. I do think it's got a role, sarcopenia and frailty, when we're talking to like-minded individuals in the health and care professions. It also has importance from a prioritisation perspective, no doubt, when you're documenting that on referral forms. But I think it comes back to the what matters to me conversation that you have with the person in front of you. You know, what is it that their goal is that they're attending the therapy for, you know, and, you know, often in an older person, you will know it's things like being able to spend time with the grandchildren, lifting the grandchildren up, being able to get in and out of the bath, you know, the endurance tasks that they may notice that they're starting to tire and fatigue a little bit more. It's trying to understand what's impacted on them and then using that as the indication that we can do things to improve that. And I do think it's helpful to educate people about age-related change and what that means, but that it is also reversible and that it's not irreversible, so that it's not inevitable and that things can be done. Because for the older population now, they are not a generation that grew up doing exercise like our society is, you know, is more akin to. And I think we have to factor that in and really just, it comes back down to person-centeredness, doesn't it, really, at the end of the day?
Thank you. I'll just say that you've got a good example sitting in front of you here of where you can go into later age as a retired member and still be pretty fit. But what I wanted to ask was, how much do you work with private gym memberships and things like that, trainers in gyms? Because I think personally, our gym section, the guys are really good and really keyed up and will know what if you send referrals or advice, they would really know what they were doing.
I agree. I think more and more of the leisure sector has got individuals who are more often from the sports science background out there and have got those skills and probably could even be better equipped at strength training than physios are, by nature of the fact that it's probably more of their bread and butter than the practical functional stuff that we do out in the community.
Equipment.
But in terms of agile, we're not necessarily interfacing in that way. I think that's something that you would want to push back to the systems with integrated care boards and the places who are trying to optimise the care pathways and routes into the services. you want to come in?
Yeah. I was also just going to add here, there's a couple of things that relate to both of these comments. Firstly, I think is that there's a real sea change happening in terms of the public awareness of sarcopenia in particularly, and the public understanding of this. So 5 years ago, you never saw the term sarcopenia. Nowadays, you can't open a Sunday paper without reading something in the supplement about sarcopenia and resistance training. So there's a real change happening there. The other change I think that's happening secularly is that people who are in midlife now go to gyms. And gym culture is normalized in a way that it isn't for the people aged 85, 95 that we're seeing in our clinics. As that population gets older, then I think a lot of the sort of negativity around this is going to resolve, and the idea of going and doing resistance exercise and going to the gym and maintaining strength will be much easier conversations to have. One of the things that we're going to hopefully do in wave 3 of BPOP, though, is start engaging much more with private sector providers. We've confined the project to NHS providers for the moment, but I absolutely agree that there's a need to engage with private sector providers. They're going to become increasingly important in this space, and making sure that they've got opportunities to take part in benchmarking initiatives like BPOP will become increasingly important.
And we've got the infrastructure to do that with later life training and Dawn and Bex on the BPOP project team, so that opportunity is, we're paving the way for that to happen.
Hello, my name's Karen. I work on a rehab ward where most of our patients are coming in extremely frail after having spent a long time in bed already, and they're coming to us having not sat out for maybe 4 or 5 weeks. And we do put a bed regime in place where just to get the patient to be able to manage their BP, just to sit out for 20 minutes to begin with. And I was just wondering if I could ask the panel and maybe even the audience members, what exercises would you prescribe for someone who I need their glutes engaging? I know what I do, and we can give exercises for everything else in the lower limb, etc. But what do we do for glutes maximization in a bed regime for someone who's really frail?
Wow. I think it's bridges. Bridges. I mean, I think you can do it. You might need to start off with literally straight leg raises, mightn't you, initially, and getting them to hold the position and go right back to the very, very, very basics. If they're able to do bridging, I would introduce bridging, and you might need to provide some support to actually lift the pelvis up off the bed and get them to hold that. You know that they're working hard, don't you, if you've got that shake factor. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily, and I think that when their deconditioning is that significant, that you probably see improvements quite readily, don't you? But also the sheer exertion and the movement from coming from being in bed to sitting upright will also engage the individual and use muscles that they may not have been using when they've been in bed for the 5 weeks that you're talking to.
And I know the lady in front of me is going to mention anything, but does anybody use a resistance training against gym balls in the bed? Yeah, okay. So I was just going to mention, it wasn't on your slides, but resistance into a small gym ball with your heel will actually engage glutes in full extension, won't it? So I was just saying, just because you're in bed, there is no mercy. You might have been extubated yesterday, there is no mercy, just because you're sitting there. So I was just going to mention that I do teach our band 3s to do a lot of gym ball work in the bed. And usually what you get a lot more engagement with an older person, you get a lot more engagement with the family. The nurses find it hilarious. And at the end, when you're getting your feedback from your patients, did you see a physio when you were on the wards? No, never saw a physio, just a nurse. Did you see someone with a gym ball? Yes. Every day I saw someone with a gym ball, and hey presto, your figures go through the roof. But it also means you've got a really engaged patient, and it works brilliantly with dementia patients as well, especially if it's not a dark coloured ball. If it's bright red or yellow, you will get brilliant engagement. So it was just to put that into the mix.
Thank you. In our community-based specialist falls service, we've got access to aquatic therapy. We know we're very fortunate to have that. And I just wonder what you think, perhaps Chris, with regard to resistance training and water as resistance for strength-based training. If you don't mind, please.
No, I don't mind. No, absolutely not. Thank you for that. I don't know if I've got a very good answer for you, unfortunately, but I have read stuff that's done water-based exercise, and it can work, definitely. I'm not sure I can give much more of a meaningful answer to that. I don't think there's a... I think it's got potential, yeah. Why, if you've got access to it, why not? I'm sure there's good ways that you can make it work, yeah. That's a terrible answer, sorry. But why not? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Or anyone else wishing to expand on that?
I mean, I think therapies like that have got a place, and I think particularly there's an evidence based around quite severe osteoarthritis of the hip and water-based therapies, and clearly, you know, there's a rationale there in terms of being able to undertake a degree of resistance training without being limited by joint pain. And then hopefully, if you can get to a point where you've got sufficient musculature around the joint that's supporting it better, you minimize the pain and then you can move away from the water base. I suppose my only caveat, and maybe I'll say things that Chris is too scared to say, is there will be some limit, won't there, to the degree of resistance exercise that you can deliver in a water-based environment, not least of which just because you're not supporting the body weight in the lower limbs, so you've already put yourself a bit further down the amount of resistance that you can bring to bear. So it won't be right for everybody, but I think it's part of the armamentarium. It's another of those big long words.
It is. But I have lived experience of it. Last year we were on holiday in Lanzarote, and there was water aerobics every day with foam arm weights and dumbbells, and I actually really enjoyed it, so much so that I looked for it when I came home, because I did get muscle shakes, and I did feel exerted, and I did get hot, and it wasn't just the sun, and it was really fun as well. So I think if you've got to bring in the fun factor, don't you? If someone's water baby all their lives, it works for them, and the caveat I think in modern day services is the time that it takes to get someone into a hydrotherapy pool if it's a one-to-one session. But if you've got that opportunity to do something with more scale in a larger pool environment like a leisure centre, then if it works, do it. If it gets them over the brow of the hill to then start working on land and doing more resisted work, then nothing's off the table, in my view.
I just wanted to add as well that when we're thinking about psychologically informed physiotherapy, we can't underestimate the fear factor, and getting someone into a pool where they're not going to fall over, or if they do, they're not going to go very far, has an enormous effect, doesn't it? I think it's really beneficial.
So there is a couple of questions online, but I think because of time, I'm just going to summarize them very quickly. Have you looked at the cost benefits of investing in strength training for people with frailty or sarcopenia, and how do you convince commissioner to invest in resources for this area?
So I think that's a very good question. To my knowledge, there hasn't been a formal cost-benefit analysis. We know there has been a cost analysis, and we know, and this is data from at least 10 years ago now, that the direct costs to the NHS of sarcopenia are around £2 billion per year. That doesn't take into account the cost of social services, and it doesn't take into account the cost to informal caring and the wider societal costs. So the costs of sarcopenia are certainly known. What I would say, though, is that the first step towards convincing commissioners is to collect data. And this is one of the other reasons why we're so keen on recommending in BPOP to measure baseline and outcomes, because if you can show that your service is doing something useful in numbers, that is powerful evidence to bring to the table to convince commissioners. So even before you get to the cost-benefit analysis stage, if you can demonstrate the effectiveness of your service, you're in a much better bargaining position to argue for either the maintenance of your current service or for its expansion. And too often in services that we're involved with, looking after older people, we're not good enough at bringing data to the table. And colleagues in other specialty areas who are much better at bringing data to the table, they win. They get the funds. Transplant services get the funds. Orthopedic services get the funds. Cardiologists get the funds. And we're often left behind with that. So measurement and bringing data to the table is a really important part of that, even without having a formal cost-benefit analysis.
And sadly, on that note, I have to stop there. But could we give a very big applause to our team this morning? Thank you.